Hello, welcome to One Moment Wiser. This is Christy Bridges, and I have a special guest today, Deana O'Hara, a local
Hey.
Christian comedian. Hey! I'm so glad you're here. I met Deana years ago when I was in the band Goliath Down, and we had a concert at a local park, at Mohawk Park. And we had all these plans for the day. We had several musicians, and we had Deana coming to do the comedy. And we waited, and we sound checked, and we waited. And a few people called and said, "Hey, are you guys still having your show?" And I'm like, "Yeah, come on out." And then we found out at the end of the day that the guards at the front of the park had not been aware of the show. And so they had told people, "Oh no, there's no show today." And people had turned away. We had a blast together, though, just hanging out in the Tulsa sunshine. And we've been friends ever since. So, Deana, thank you so much for coming today. I'm so grateful you're here. Um,
Well, thank you. I'm thrilled to be here and just honored, Christy. It's great knowing you, and I remember that day. That was is now hilarious. We did get to live stream though, which was
that was fun.
successful. Yeah, and I learned a lot about promotion at that point. It's like you need to let the gatekeepers know, but it was a fun day.
You think? It was a fun day though. We had a lot of really neat people that day. So you have actually, well, let me think of where to start with you. You have been doing comedy in Oklahoma and all over the country for the
Mhm.
last few years, but you started doing comedy, I believe, just kind of as a way to cope with some really rough childhood relationships. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Well, in high school, I was in theater. I was kind of like this quiet nerd who loved theater, so I did that. And in the 90s, I'd actually gotten into a recovery program by then, and had started writing comedy scripts for different 12-step uh, events and or conferences and women's conferences. So I discovered that I was kind of funny. I mean, but I definitely used humor to cope. No, I've since learned post my 12-step program, post 90s, that my audience is not my therapist.
Mhm.
And I do need to be careful of that. And there are a few other people, I'm not going to go there. But I did have to learn that. And I did learn, that it's easier for me to tell a joke or pop off and pretend I'm okay than to face necessarily what's really going on.
Mhm.
But the feedback I got, especially my early years in comedy, and Christy, I think you used to hear this bit, is yes, I am the daughter of a prom queen. And one of the stories I used to tell, and it killed, which is a good thing in comedy,
Yeah.
is that my mother was a prom queen. She was all ball gowns and tiaras, and I came out in tie-dye and blue jeans. And, which people kind of laughed at that juxtaposition. But what I discovered is the stories I was telling were stories of abuse.
Mm.
And I don't know if you've ever been in a room with somebody who overshares, but if you get two people who have come from dysfunctional backgrounds and we just start sharing and riffing off of each other about how funny that is, the room will get silent and people will get bug-eyed. And so I went through a few years of oversharing, not only on stage, but in Bible studies and different things, assuming, well, everybody went through this. And no, everybody did not. And so there's been I've been getting paid for comedy, I should say, since 2009. And I love it. I play churches and I play and clubs as well. Um, but I need to serve my audience, not emotionally vomit all over them.
Mm.
And there are some pieces of my story that would get me promoted to the late night, and that's not who I want to be with God. And so it's been a journey because early on in my comedy, I was mean to my family. I was mean to my parents. Yes, it got a lot of laughs, but I had to go back, and that's where we joke. You said, I think I loved the intro where, comedy and therapy are cousins, and, and there's truth in that. I think that I'm gonna get the phrase wrong, I think, that comedy equals tragedy plus time,
Ooh, yes. Tragedy
and
plus
there's
time. I like that.
I like it too, but, low-hanging fruit eliminates the time.
Mm,
And as a comedian who happens to be a Christian, I want to make sure that I include not just tragedy plus time, but Jesus,
yeah.
and not to over spiritualize it because a lot of what I went through, and I want to make sure that we explain this like heads up because I don't want to pile on anybody going through this. Um, there was Jesus, there was my comedy, my friends, there were social workers, there were nursing homes, there were doctors, there were an entire community of help. Yes, Jesus is awesome. My journey, however, has been one of healing that's taken and is still in process. I hope that answers
No, that's
that.
wonderful. What I see so often in comedy, because, well, honestly, there's just not a lot of Christian comedy that I guess you just don't see as much of it as you see secular comedy. Definitely not in my house because, my husband loves watching stand up. And a lot of what you see when you understand the human heart and when you see um, the mental health issues that I've seen, you recognize that this isn't as funny as it comes across at first. At first we laugh because it's so shocking, and we're grateful that someone is laughing. It's so ridiculous maybe that people behave the way they do. But when you understand people to some extent, you see there's a lot of pain there. And so to still be able to make people laugh after going through some of the healing, that is impressive and that takes skill. I love that you can recognize I don't have to be mean. I don't
Yeah,
have to take my audience through trauma, just to be funny. I can actually crack people up, and you certainly do. I really enjoy that. Now, you mentioned that you are a Christian, and Jesus has been a big
mhm,
part of that healing process, but that you also had a whole community around you. When did
I did.
when did that start? When did you start recognizing that you wanted help?
Um, well, probably when I was in 8th grade. So my mom had just gotten sober, and I was really angry,
Yeah.
and and she's gone up.
Because
Yeah,
she was
mom
sober?
has. Yeah, well, she had issues with alcohol, but I was angry. There was a divorce,
Oh,
and we were alone again. And there was this bully in school in junior high that used to go after kids, and she always ignored me. This is an important point,
interesting.
except I finally got tired of it. And in the locker room in PE, again, I'm in 8th grade, her goons, she had 2 bodyguards, and they were gone. And I grabbed her by up her ponytail and I bashed her head into a locker. And that is when her goons showed up. And I and this is really sad because I'm going to my 40th, high school reunion this summer, and I don't remember who these girls are. I have no idea, I don't remember their names, I blocked it out. But these 2 girls grabbed me, and I'm in a training bra and gym shorts, and threw me out into the gymnasium. And
Mm.
so that's when I figured out I was told I needed help. I landed at the feet of the track coach, and, his name was Mr. Olette. Um, I had a choice. He knew all of the drama that was going on in my home. He knew, prior to that I mean, my mom and my stepdad used to get into fist fights on the front lawn,
Oh,
and, um, and I had a stepbrother selling pot out of the basement, and one of the jokes I used to tell on stage is even the Jehovah Witness would just keep walking by going, "There's no hope for them, there's no hope."
oh gosh.
So, I mean, it was an extraordinarily dysfunctional situation. Add to that, I didn't know where my birth father was, I didn't know where he lived at that time. Um, but mom had gotten sober, I had anger issues, and the track coach offered me 10 days of detention where I had to run laps until I puked,
Ugh.
like, and or go to Alateen. They just started a brand new Alateen program, and that's for children of alcoholics. And so, I didn't realize I needed help. I was told I needed help. Um, Now the downside to that is a year and a half later, they stuck a microphone in my hand saying, "What do you wanna do next?" And I think at 14, I might have been a little too young to really share the realities of it because I was still dealing with, "Don't make me look bad."
Mm.
I was very codependent at that age, and, no, "and's" not the right word. Um, but Al-Anon or Alateen was my saving grace in high school. It kept me out of a lot of trouble. It kept me out of roads I could have gone down,
Mhm.
um, which is during that time period. So I was in 8th grade and I was popular. I was a majorette. I was in student council. I even had one of those hangy Annie boyfriends because you needed those to stay popular. You just did. And I
Yanni
still
boyfriend.
have, and it was cute and it was sweet. And he's married to somebody else, and I've been married for 34 years. So there's nothing weird about that. We just held hands in the hall and we held hands at lunch. We might have gone to the movies once. I can't remember if his mom drove me or I did. Now in 9th grade, we did wind up breaking up um, for mutually beneficial reasons. I got in trouble and he got in trouble for two totally unrelated things
Yeah.
that I'm not going to share live because I don't want to hurt him or myself. But I gave my mother a run for her money early on, and I was trying to stay popular,
Yeah.
but during that time, do you remember Lisa Welshel from Facts of Life?
Oh,
Blair.
yeah. I used to wanna look just like her.
No, oh, we all did. And I mean, I huge respect. I've not spoken to her, seen her in years. She's lived through some things,
Mhm.
and she's a life coach now. And we were not raised in the church, or I wasn't raised in the church. Mom was anti-church, but I did know how to pray. I did know who God was. Um, Judith Bloom wrote a book, "Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret."
Yes.
And I loved that book. Mom gave that to me to teach me about facts of life. That was our facts talk. Is here, read this. And
Wow.
but what I loved about the book is it's about a young girl who's not changing fast enough to suit herself.
Yep.
And so she sits on her bed and she talks to God about it. And so that's actually how I learned that I could talk to God about all of my problems.
How cool.
Um, so that was really cool. I mean, God can use anything. I know some people say that you just need to stick with Christian material or whatever. There's things on the secular market that are helpful, and it's okay to reach out beyond that. And so I got that book. I knew that already. Um, but we went to see Lisa Welshel, and my best friend went with me. And now again, I'm in 8th grade. I'm popular. I'm doing all the right things. I obviously have anger issues because I picked a fight with a bully. So I'm in Alateen, but Lisa could have only been 16, maybe. And she came in talking about body image, purity. Um, she touched on and alluded to the abuse that she'd experienced in Hollywood, but she didn't go into detail like she does now.
Oh, wow.
Um, and it was different than anything I'd heard. It
That's
was absolutely
powerful for a 16-year-old to be
very
able to
powerful.
talk intelligently about that.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so and I mean, I kind of understood it. There was something different about her. It had to do with the relationship with Jesus Christ.
Mhm.
Um, and so all I need to do was go home and tell God I want that. I don't know what that is, but I want that. And at the time there was a church in town that I could go to and walk to. It was like 3 blocks from my house. So I went to all three churches and I do share this, but it upsets people. I asked all three of them if I could join, and they all three said no.
What?
And yeah, they all three well, I was 13.
Mhm.
An unsupervised child can be was problematic to them. And so I received that as a kid as I can't belong. And I can visit, I can go with friends, but church must be something you're born into. And so I carried that. It would be another, gosh, 15 years before I joined my first church.
Hmm.
And that created its own issues. But what was really cool during that time period is my neighbors continued to bring me tapes. And so Isaac Airfreight came and visited their church. I got those tapes. Um, Petra, I think, came and performed. I got that tape.
Hey.
Uh, so I know, right? So I grew up with, pretty cool stuff. And there was one tape, and I could not remember the author. I just found out who it was. He was a comedian, and he sang sometimes. I used to think it was Mark Lowry, but I've since found out otherwise. The only story I can remember from his tape was he was apparently so misbehaved as a child that he thought for sure God was going to strike him dead with lightning on the sidewalk and zot, leave him as nothing but a grease spot on the ground.
Okay.
And and that used to make me laugh because I was kind of a problem child.
Mm, mm,
And, it was nice to know, and his what he ended that with is, "God will never leave you dead by the side of the road."
mm.
And I've
Oh,
always
Lord.
hung on. Yeah, and there's truth in that. So even though I went through a season of I went into some really dark places for a few years looking for God.
Mhm.
Um, when we finally got to join a church, and I met a Christian, married a Christian, and, you make a lot of friends. He took me to church with him when we were dating, and it was one of those old brick churches, and the cross was naked. Well, it was empty. It was an empty cross, sorry. But you make a lot of what I was used to was the Catholic church in my neighborhood, and
Right.
because I see that, so I was used to the massive crucifix. I did discover that you make a lot of friends, when you are a visitor, and you whisper, but it's all brick so they hear you, "Why is the cross naked?" I mean, my husband and boyfriend at the time just sunk down in the pews, was so mortified. And, so yeah, so that was, like, one of the early beginnings in the church, because I didn't understand they're Protestant, and I didn't understand it means because he is risen, that's what that
Right.
means. And, I didn't know that. And the ladies in church, they have a what they call the Lutheran Women's Missionary League,
Mhm.
and it's a wonderful, amazing group of ladies in mission, and I love them. But in Chicago, they call themselves the church basement ladies. And so and
Okay,
I
that's
didn't
kind of fun too, though.
name. I was, 23, I didn't know what that meant. And I asked them, what they did, and they said, "Well, they sew quilts and they cook supper for Jesus," which I now know means serve dinner to the homeless. I did not know that then. So I got bug-eyed, and I thanked them for their time, and we left. Never to go back to that church, but, we found a different one. But I looked at my boyfriend in the car, and it's like, "Okay, I'm confused." And the joke I made to cover up how scared I was and how embarrassed I was, really, over the whole naked cross comment, um, is I know that it's been at least 2,000 years since Jesus walked this earth, just so you know.
Mhm.
And he's like, "Okay." Like, so this whole cook supper for Jesus thing, these ladies are either pulling my leg or they've held up remarkably well. And I told, because I was I after being told I couldn't join the church and I visited, once I moved out on my own, I didn't go back.
Right.
And all I had is this tape. So every time I went into anything occult like, I would find this tape and I would be reminded, I'm not going to leave you dead by the side of the road. So we did eventually get married. We, but strangely enough, the first church we got married in, they didn't ask us to join. Our son was baptized. They didn't ask us to join. It wasn't until we came to Oklahoma
Mhm.
and our next son, we wanted him baptized. And pastor was like, well, I'd love to do that, but we'd like you guys to join the church. And Christy, I made that pastor cry because I'm like, "Oh, well, my husband can. I'm not allowed to." And he'd never heard that just blew his mind. And, he's like, "Wait, what? What?" So we did live with or I did deal with early on in Christianity or my faith and going to a church. This man made a mistake. The elders are going to find out. I'm gonna get kicked out. And so, I mean, I would, like, violently shake for the first few years in church. Um, and definitely, you wanna talk about a good work that God did. I finally and I'll be calm about this because I think I overshared this at one point. So, I don't know if this can you see that, Christy?
Yes. That's a good book.
And that's duct tape. Um, So I'm not overly
Mm.
enthusiastic, and that's that.
I love Bibles that have been written in. That makes me so happy.
Oh, yeah, and all kinds of notes. And I took this with me to Phoenix, but I forgot to share it. So this particular church, it was the pastor was young, so I was 28, so 15 years later. So he and his wife were maybe 33, 34. They had young kids. And what I wound up doing, that was a brand new Bible. And I'd already been told I couldn't join the Christian church. I'd already been part of numerous occult churches. They were non-Christian, really. And I knew a lot of church history. I wasn't atheist, I was agnostic at this point. And so I handed in that Bible and I said, prove it. Because he would talk about the one true Christian faith. And I'm like, this group believes in this group believes in that. And he was a young pastor,
Mhm.
um, got a little bug eyed on me. And, but he's like, okay, challenge accepted. His wife was a certified precepts instructor by Kay Arthur. And she had just started a women's Bible study. Why don't you go to that? And this happened. She was teaching it on the book of Titus. I think I'd made it through the first one on Lord Teach Me to Pray. And I survived with my sanity intact. But precepts is really difficult because it takes you to the Greek and the Hebrew. It's an inductive Bible. It's an amazing Bible study, but it is difficult.
It is slow and
And
deep. Yeah.
and we were doing Titus, which is tiny, tiny, tiny book. And I got frustrated one night, and I whipped my Bible against the wall,
Oh.
and that's how I broke the binding. Well, it opened into Isaiah where it says, "Fear not, for I've redeemed you and called you by name. You are mine." And I'm not
Mm.
being Bible roulette, but that, God speaks to us through his word. That could not have
Yes, he
been a
does.
coincidence. And so that's kind of like the short version or story. There's been like a ton of healing that's gone on since then. Um,
Hey,
but
Bible
no,
roulette broke me from lying, so God
and
knows how to talk. He knows how to get through to us.
he took us through this. And so yeah, no, I spent 10 years at their feet in Bible studies, wound up eventually getting certified to teach this myself.
Wonderful.
But that's what goes back to, the imposter syndrome thing we were talking about. Every step of the way in ministry, I felt like a fraud.
Yeah.
And I went on a rabbit trail with you, Christy. I am so sorry, but
Never
what was
apologize.
your
God leads us where he wants to take us. You actually, it's funny because you thought you couldn't belong to a church, but it was literally because of a church that you were very, very much a part of. That Goliath Down even was able to come out with the album. Our first album
Oh, yeah.
was funded by your church, the church that you were going to at the time. And you were it was just neat to get to know all of you. You were such an active family. I appreciated that.
Thank you. And that was an awesome trip. I do love it. Everything's for a
Yeah.
season. And that's where and this is where
Mhm.
the support came in taking care of my mom and eventually taking care of my dad before he passed. This was
Yeah.
my family. And I got to be part of their teaching program and, so they let women speak there and preach. And I kind of like that.
Right?
So
Right?
and awesome.
So the healing
And so they were
began then with, finally
absolutely.
getting into, a church where you could learn and they actually wanted to include you. Um,
And,
and a
and it was awesome.
marriage to a really cute banjo player.
So I play guitar, but I'm a cute banjo player. And
Oh, that's right.
yes, but that was part of my backstory. In my community, it does involve recovery programs. It doesn't involve recovery people. Um, there was a
And the
time.
Alateen, I'm sorry, you said that, and I meant to ask about this earlier, but the Alateen, what made it work for you as a teenager? Um, what made it work for you? You were right at the age where we start to really pay attention to ourselves and want to make better choices than what we've seen around us. So what made that helpful for you?
For me at that age, it was actually a younger woman who was sponsoring our team. I needed a mother influence,
Mm.
and so that was and she was really good. taught me a lot of things on how can I put this? About relationships, um, pros and cons.
Mm,
I'm gonna call it, she taught me about the birth control because she was concerned. I'm a teenage
mhm.
girl trying to be popular, and, not that I went down that road in high school, I kinda like boys, ick. Um, and so sh I had that mentorship. I had the mentorship of an older female,
Yeah.
um, and that for me was really helpful. And I did, once I turned 18, I went away to college. I kind of went away from the rooms for a while. I totally appreciated the college life. I'll just leave it at that.
Right.
And back to Alateen, or I came back to Al-Anon, and those were good rooms for me. And I
Good.
questioned around that time, like I said, I wasn't in church, but I had my 12-step program, and I had very Christian sponsors, which was helpful.
Nice.
And they introduced me to Christian authors. And so I was on my own by then in my like 19 to 22, learning about Jesus, learning about so God's promises were coming true.
Mhm.
And I do remember a point where my dad had come for my 21st birthday because I hadn't seen him in 7 years or 5 years or several years anyway. He wanted to buy me my first drink. That was his only, he wanted, I know, right? The dysfunction in my family. And he saw my books and he asked, well, when did she become such a Jesus freak? And I still wasn't allowed to join churches yet in my neighborhood, but and my mom looked at him like, "Don't worry, Bill, it's just a phase."
Wow.
And so it was through I had amazing female mentors and sponsors through high school, and once I got into Al-Anon, um, I'm told Celebrate Recovery is awesome. We just have not joined a group here,
Mhm.
but I great things for that. I've got friends who've gone through that. It was the having other women in my life that were able to speak life into it. It was my pastor's wife at the time who spoke life. I've been blessed with amazing pastors' wives, and you've
So
been
they
really
spoke
gifted.
life and they spoke the word and they accepted you and didn't treat you the same kinds of ways that your
Right,
mom had. Yeah.
right, and that I was used to, and, learning, 30 years later, we're all going through the same junk,
Mhm.
just in different ways,
Yeah.
and so it did eventually level the playing field, once I discovered that it's like, "Oh, you've got an issue with this. Oh, okay." I loved your video on sarcasm because, yeah, the sarcasm is my love language. I think I have that. So
Love language, I love it.
yeah, I loved that, but it was definitely having older women who spoke life and spoke the word. God has always put those women into my life,
Of
which is
course.
thankful.
And then you said, recently you mentioned that the church that you were going to when Goliath Down was active, that's the church that kind of helped you through the period of taking care of your parents
Right.
in there. Okay, so and let's pause for just a second and address the hidden elephant, right? The hidden elephant here. Um, you had narcissists for parents. I mean,
I did.
there's really not any other way around that. And that, you can say things objectively without being mean to people, right? That they didn't behave in ways that were helpful. They created a lot of pain with the way that they acted. And you had to go through some healing. And I mean, I think every parent-child relationship involves something that requires us to forgive. Parents are just kids when they have us, right?
Mhm.
They don't know how to do this until they do it. But then you had to, as an adult, go back and well, I guess you chose to. You didn't have to, but you
Right.
chose to go back into the relationship and take care of them. Tell us tell us what you learned here, what that was like for you, how you managed it.
Um, I appreciate yeah, both of those were choices. Now, there was a situation, and I try to be careful now, especially after
Mhm.
having been not to over spiritualize.
Right.
Because when I was seeking advice from some spiritual guiders, they were telling me, well, the Bible says, honor your mother and father, and all will go good for you. So you have to go do this. And I didn't like that answer. And it's not that I felt crushed by that answer.
You can
Um,
honor people from a safe place. Right.
absolutely. And learning what that meant. And so, Christy, it was interesting when I saw the clip. I think it was the first time that I'd seen my mother's name and the word narcissist in print. And
Mm,
I'm definitely hurting feelings by admitting that my mother was a narcissist,
I'm so
or at
sorry.
least very no, it's she showed very strong narcissistic tendencies.
Mhm.
Now, it's a different dynamic between my two parents because my mother raised me.
Yeah.
I'd had enough recovery in my life to have empathy. My mother was very greatly abused. She had lived through significant trauma.
Mm.
Um, and in doing research, there's different types. And I refused to admit for years that she had those tendencies, but I told you a story that I'll share briefly in a second. She was more of a covert narcissist.
Mhm.
And but when I think of narcissist, I think of The Big Bang Theory. Do you watch that show at all?
Yeah, well, I used to. Haven't watched in a
Uh,
while, but that was great.
yeah, I'm trying to think of what's his name's. It's not Sheldon. It's not Howard. The other guy that marries the waitress. His
Leonard.
mother,
Oh,
Leonard.
Leonard's
Um,
mother?
his mother was this famous PhD author and textbook narcissist. I always envisioned them to be like overachievers and all of that. What I've since learned, though, and I especially like this, and who I got help from. Have you heard of Brene Brown?
I love Brene Brown. Yeah.
Yes. And I want to read this. And I did not. I found this awesome clip, but I didn't get permission ahead of time to share it on your podcast. So
Well, we
just
can
I'm
put a
just
link to it, though.
okay.
Yep.
And but she talks about this. She's found empathy in narcissism, and she's found it with self-awareness, honesty. But
Mhm.
she calls it grandiosity driven by high performance and self-hatred. That narcissism is, as far as all personality disorders go, they're really driven by that, and they're very shame-based. And there's a shame-based fear of being ordinary. Um, and another thing that Brene says that really jumped out at me is where it says the need to be seen, known, and loved. We're just created for that,
Right.
coupled with the need to see, know, and love others. And I think that's very important. There's a saying in my rooms that says, "You spot it, you got it." And I'm pretty sure I bought my therapist a house. I think we joked about that. Um, I had to begin to own what I'm calling narcissistic traits, not
Mhm.
only in my mother and in my father, but in myself. Because let's face it, I started in corporate and I was the first woman to ever run a switch room. I won awards for that in telecom. I went to work in a church, and again, women paid staff in church. It's predominantly a male driven
Mhm.
study or situation, and then doing stand up comedy again. And I honestly believe in order for me to have survived those situations, to have succeeded in those situations, I had to have some level of narcissism in myself. There had to
So
be some
here's
level.
Yeah, and here's where we probably should talk a little bit, just for those who aren't familiar with this. Narcissism is a real popular. Everybody's a
Yes.
narcissist nowadays, right? You know, all
Right.
all our exes are narcissists, according to social media. Um, Anybody we don't like. So let's talk
Right.
about that for a second, because narcissism, just like any other um, mental health issue, is simply natural traits that have gotten out of whack, natural
Right.
traits that have been taken, have been un reined, right? We've let them off the reins, and they've gone wild. And so the traits that psychom.net lists are having an inflated sense of self-importance and entitlement, needing constant admiration, expecting special treatment, exaggerating achievements and talents, um, reacting negatively to criticism, and taking advantage of others. And gaslighting, a lot of times, is part of that. Having an unwillingness to recognize the needs and feelings of others or behaving in an arrogant manner. Well, those are things we see, but like what you were saying, they come from um, places that can drive us to success or places that can drive other people crazy. You know, right? We all don't feel good when we get criticism, right? Anybody go, oh, I love criticism. I like feedback. Criticism, though, I'm not real fond of.
I'll
Um,
cry. Yeah.
but reacting negatively to criticism, when we overreact and take everything as an attack, that stops us from growing.
Right.
Or when we flip any kind of boundary or criticism, when we flip it to being there's something wrong with you, or you wouldn't be saying that to me or asking me to, be this way. And so that's gaslighting, right? But that's a similar thing, and it stems from a normal reaction. We feel criticized, and so we feel defensive, that we don't let God say, hey, this is how I want you to handle this. And instead we overreact and can really hurt people. And the same thing with, grabbing the bully by the ponytail because you have a need to be noticed, right?
Right.
And or being the prom queen forever and ever because you have the need to be noticed and respected. So those things we all actually kind of want, um, to be recognized for what we are and who we are. And sometimes we let that override the need to recognize others and elevate others, or we let ourselves get too competitive instead of realizing that we can elevate others without losing anything ourselves. So that I'm not. I just wanted to talk about that for a moment for those who are listening and really haven't gotten an education of what narcissism really is. So in your life, tell us a little bit more about how that played out, or how you got this. Well, anyway, where you were going with that.
I appreciate that. I meant to bring that in. Right now, everyone's a narcissist, that's true. And at least on social media.
That's what
So
everybody says anyway.
well, and I'm gonna, just to differentiate here, there are dangerous, dangerous people out there, um,
True.
who are abusive, I've got girlfriends who own guns that shouldn't need to own guns anymore to protect themselves from their exes. So I'm not diminishing narcissism as a whole.
Right.
It can be very dangerous, and it can be an incredible mental illness. But where I was going with this, I mean, so I shared with you, this is just an example,
Mhm.
and there's some hard truths about this. I mean, my mom was diagnosed bipolar when I was 9. I refused to take medication. And so most of my life, I just thought I was dealing with a bipolar parent. And it wasn't until after she passed away and I went into therapy and did that bit that killed at the loony bin, absolutely killed and got me promoted, which I'm no longer doing, because it made people cry. Uh, in reality,
Yeah.
and I lost that thought all of a sudden. Um, but there were some stories, like when I was growing up, I couldn't compete with my mother,
Right.
and even though I was just a child, I wasn't trying to compete. If I bonded with somebody she was dating, and I'm talking I'm 12 years old, 13 years old, she would accuse me of trying to sleep with them. Okay, is that the alcoholic in her? Is that abuse victim in her? Was it the narcissist? Um, if I spent time with my dad, who I hardly ever saw, she was immediately threatening to pack my bags and send me to go live with him, but he's not gonna want you anyway, so now what are you gonna do? I mean, there were things that happened. And I shared, to me, it was a funny story. And this is one of my friends from CCA, actually. It was Sandy Joy who called me going, don't ever tell this joke again. It's not funny. Um, it broke my heart. Don't do this.
Oh.
But it was over the funeral.
Mhm.
And while I'm planning mom's death and we're sitting down and we're doing funeral arrangements, I'm like, okay, mom, help me pick out a dress. And she's like, oh, not yet. I need to know what you're wearing. Like, nobody's gonna care." And she goes, "Well, I don't wear one of those long skirts that makes you look like a hobbit. Get your suitcase. I wanna know what you're wearing to my funeral." And my mother picked out my funeral clothes before she picked out her own. And I'm like, "Why are you doing this?" And she's like, "Because my friends are going to be there. And what are they gonna think if you show up looking bad?" So, now granted, she was dying, but that's been her whole life. What I did was reflection on her. Um, and I wound up she picked an outfit that I used to wear on stage all the time, black pants and a red shirt, cold shoulders, which I love, and her red hat, because she was a red hat lady. Now, I'm to be clear, I love my mother. She worked 2 jobs to raise me, um, and I was very heartbroken for her because there came a point that I knew in her life that she chose to stop healing, and I do see that a lot. Um, so again, it was my church background, it was my Al-Anon and my sponsors that helped me get through that. My dad was a different story. He would have been categorized at one point as one of those dangerous narcissists. Very huge sense of grandiosity. Excuse me. They got divorced when I was 4. Um, one of the very young memories I have of him is trashing the kitchen because it wasn't clean enough. So there was violence early on in the marriage. They got divorced, and I spent 6 months with him, I think, from the time I was 6 until I was 38.
Mm,
And by then, I had become an adult, and we used to let him come visit on Christmas. But we did not have a good, close relationship. It was very superficial.
yeah.
He used to bring me out for dog and pony shows, and he would do that to my sister too. The only time we saw him is when he had someone wealthy to impress.
Mm,
And and this is a joke, but it's real. And a friend of mine shared this, and she's a single mom now. There
mhm.
is no stronger ride or die than the brand new girlfriend of a deadbeat dad who thinks that the mom is keeping the kids away from him. And those were the women that he would introduce us to prove that
Mm.
he was a good dad, to prove that he had a family. And then he'd wind up taking him for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Once I figured that out, I felt horrible. Um,
Ouch.
so yeah. And but his take was he was always doing a business adventure and he'd find women willing to partner with his business adventure. Um, but the last time, well, I've met the last 3 as an adult, and one of them was a personal friend with the Reagans, and she was the oh, man, I loved her. She was awesome. She was like the ambassador to Brazil for the Say No to Drugs campaign,
Alright.
and she's a psychotherapist, and she's amazing. And I'm sitting there, probably my 19-year-old self, going, "You're everything I wanna be when I grow up. What are you doing with him?" And oh, she was so mad. And
That
that's the last time she ever spoke to me. A year later, he was on to a senator's wife.
mm,
And then 4 years after that, it was a school teacher from Southern Cal. And that's when everything fell apart. So my dad showed up here homeless, jobless, and penniless when I was 38. So it
mm,
was a different kind of story.
yeah.
And his other daughter chose to go full no contact. Um, I was very much in victim mode when that happened. And I mean, my mother was already declining in health. She was already mad at me for taking my dad's side. But I felt trapped
Yeah.
because he now lived in my town. He now knew where I lived, and he would just randomly show up at our house. So we set strict boundaries of you need to go get a job, you need to go live here. And it wasn't until the year my mom died and he was diagnosed with chronic leukemia. He was showing signs of dementia. He got evicted from every house he lived in. He couldn't pay his bills. And he was diagnosed with pulmonary fibrosis. That, and again, this is not something I would suggest other people to do. We had the means to buy a small house for him. And we did that um, because I didn't have the heart to it was too late, in my opinion, to, go no contact, and,
Okay.
we put him in a house, and I immediately contacted social services. I spent, I wanna say, 2 solid years before I got help with that, and lockdown hit, and I put him in a home, which is right towards the end where we're coming out of the whole COVID thing, but I
Mhm.
put him in assisted living. So, I had my church, I had my God, and I had social services.
Yeah.
And I had friends willing to go over to the house and, "Hey, can you clean the gutters for me?" "Hey, there's something wrong with the air conditioner. Can you look it out or look at it?" I had
Mhm.
neighbors who watched out for him. So I wasn't alone. My mentor likes to tell me that martyrs aren't cute, and self-inflicted martyrs are not cute. I think that was her phrase.
No.
And so, there was none of that. I
Mhm.
mean, we rallied all the troops. And did I do it perfect? No. Did we have our fights? Yes.
Mm, I'm sure.
Um, yeah, and one of the things we had some real conversations that were hard and painful for both of us, because he wanted to know why my sister wasn't there, and I probably handled it wrong, but I was brutally honest. And I literally said, "Because you were a horrible father,
Yeah.
and the only reason I'm here is because I don't feel like I have a choice." And was that the right thing to say? I don't know. Was it the truth of how I felt? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, Once we got him someplace safe, he didn't pass away from COVID, but he was only there about 6 months, got pneumonia. And so what I do remember is getting the call to go to intensive care, and he was unconscious. My dad never regained consciousness with me while he was there, or while I was there. They
Right.
did bring him out once, and he went right back under before I could get there. But sitting there, I played Frank Sinatra for him. The gift that came out of all that is Dad had joined a church. He went back to Rome, went back to the Catholic Church, and found a peace that I'd never seen in my life,
Wonderful.
which was wonderful. And I had a peace about being there.
Yeah.
But I played for all that, and we were talking about taking him off life support. He'd been on life support for about a week. They tried to take him off twice, it didn't work. And so we were making hard decisions, and I was his healthcare proxy. Um, at one My dad rallied, and they talk about this,
Mhm.
and, all of a sudden, he just lit up, and he's like tubes everywhere, IVs everywhere, and he sat straight up in bed and started tugging at his clothes and started doing his hair, and I'm getting in his face like, "Hey, daddy, it's me. Hey, daddy, it's." No, it wasn't. He did not see me, he did not see my husband. His eyes lit up straight to the back of the room, and he
Really?
was grinning, and he was giggling, and he was laughing, and it clicked. He saw Jesus. And
Wow.
and then boom, he was out. He went straight back out, and we had been praying like, "They want me to take him off life support. I'm gonna kill my dad." And I
Mm,
was not equipped for that. That's where I was mentally, and so we'd
that's
been praying.
hard, right?
Oh, it's hard. It's a horrible decision, even if especially if you've got a good relationship, much less a bad one. It's
Right?
horrible. No one wants that. And I viewed that kind of as an answer to a prayer.
Yeah.
What had happened, what he did, what we got to witness. So
Yeah.
for me, we were given peace. We were able to take him off life support. They took him upstairs to hospice. St. John's Utica Square, the best. Oh my gosh, we have to live through
Really.
something like that. That's Their staff was amazing. They immediately sent a counselor to me. They immediately, because I spent the first night there, I felt so guilty.
Oh, I'm
I
sure.
refused. I wouldn't leave his side. I wouldn't leave his room. And they told me to go home.
Yep.
They said I was welcome to stay there, but go home. And that was a blessing. So in the end, my dad found his own peace with God. He found his own peace with his life choices. Um, he came from a very broken childhood as well. There was a lot of guilt, a lot of shame. Definitely a lot of grandiosity. I mean, he had dinner with the Reagans. My dad ran with some really influential people
Mhm.
at the expense of his daughters. Because when he came of age, he had two daughters who wanted nothing to do with him.
Yeah.
And I mean, we found peace in it. Jeff and I are all about making the right choice. This isn't the right choice for a lot of people. My sister made the right choice to go no contact. She did. That was absolutely the right choice for her because he would have taken advantage of her too.
Yeah.
And, anyway, but that's that story. That's that whole
It helps
together
to have a
story.
partner who
Yes,
can keep you grounded when you're dealing with people who would otherwise take advantage of you.
right.
You need that partner who's willing to say, no, absolutely not, who's willing to, be there when you're venting or crying, and that other person to keep you from being sucked into the abyss with someone
Right.
who would just drain your life from you. And I will say, the same God who raised people from the dead before there was ever life support is still
Mhm.
capable of doing that if he wants to. So
Right.
I can imagine. I know how hard that is, but it is not. Um, I don't think it should ever be uh, a source of guilt, because if we believe that when we die we're going to see him, and if we believe that he could heal us right now if he had stuff for us to do, then it's okay. That's a decision we make carefully, we make thoughtfully and prayerfully, but it's not a source um, to let the devil just constantly beat us up, right?
Oh, exactly. And I was in a position where he trusted me to make the right choice.
Good.
And it's important that we have those and to remember and be reminded they trusted us because aging does get harder with
Oh
parents.
yeah.
And, healthcare proxies usually fall on the kids.
Yep.
And knowing that we had those conversations while they were still lucid is really, really important. And to not exactly, the devil's going to come in going, hey, you killed your dad. And no, that's not true. I
Yeah,
honored his wishes.
that's right.
And that's where that hospital came in really good because he had a DNR during COVID. And it was an immediate DNR if he got COVID. He did not,
Mhm.
he was 84 years old with lung disease and all that. He didn't want to go through that. Don't save
Right.
him. This was post COVID, post all of that. But I still worked with the social workers and with the doctors going, help me honor his living will. And so we had that other person. And it helped that my husband was supportive of, hey, your dad's here. I get this is a really weird, awkward situation. But we went day by day and prayer by prayer of what were the right and healthy choices for him. And there was
Awesome.
a lot of at a distance,
Yeah.
uh, because he lived here for almost 20 years, and half the time I didn't know where he lived. So I just knew he could show up at my house anytime. But I never had an address, and so I would only hear from him when he needed something
Yeah.
until the very end, until we discovered that he couldn't take care of himself. And so I think by then we developed enough of a team that
Hmm.
we knew we were making the right decisions. So, was, my sister's decision better than mine? I think they had equal she did what was right, I did what was right, or what we felt led to do.
Each of
Um,
us has an awareness of how much we can take, and hopefully we have
right.
people who can help guard us, right? My husband's a really
Yes.
good guard for me because sometimes I think I can take more than I can or more than I should. So,
Right.
we each have to make our own decision in that. There's no you're right. There's right for each person on a different level.
And
I'm
and Christy,
so
thank you.
glad that you know that. I'm so glad that you didn't make yourself, so vulnerable. Oh, here, Dad, we have an extra bedroom, or you know what I mean, that you found a way to stay whole and keep your healing. And I know it was a struggle. It was a challenge.
And it can be, and that's where I go, especially when you talk about, do I take that on stage in my shows? Absolutely not.
Right.
And, I'm not going to just, on the audience, they're not my therapist.
Right.
So, finding ways now, there were some things about dementia I did poke fun at, um, just more for humor that worked. But no, not sharing the nitty-gritty, and I know a lot of comedians that are in an incredible amount of pain. Um, you have to look through what they don't talk about, what they don't mention. I do think everybody's story is important, and Christy, so I love what you're doing here, because and I'm kind of my mind just went blank on it, but we're healed or we are saved by His blood and the word of our testimony. Um, I am one of those, even though I'm a Bible teacher, that I can go, it's in there somewhere. I can't remember what one of those, but I
I
am.
can never remember the numbers. Yeah.
Um,
Bible
but
Gateway. Yeah.
and I think we heal. That's what I love the women's events for, because we do share experience, strength, and hope. Is what I
Yeah.
call it, or the hope and hurt and the healing, which my mentor calls it. And there is hope in Jesus, and there is hope. It's not all Jesus, and it took me about 20 years to realize that I had some healing I needed to do. I'd had an unfortunate experience in a church, which I shared in a different talk, somebody didn't like me, didn't think I belonged, and then called and asked me to clean out his coffee cup, which made me really mad, or asked me to turn it off because it was
Mhm.
and I had to choose between, staying in hurt feelings or letting the church burn down, and it was not Life Park, it was a different church. And I go and I see the coffee's full, and I started arguing with the Holy Spirit. Um, I see it's full, and I'm like, "Eh, whatever," and I go to walk out, and there's this check in my spirit saying, "No, empty it." And I didn't want to,
Well, you
and I had
didn't pee
immense
in it, so that's good. That would have been my first thought. I
I didn't
wouldn't
spit
have
it, I
done
didn't
it,
have
but
to, you know, but I argued with the Holy Spirit, and I'd heard a speaker, someone at some point say, "If anyone has a right to be angry, it's you, but humility will get you further."
yeah.
And I was still processing that. So I wound up, dumping the cup out, and then I noticed it's all shiny and white on the outside, and it's filthy on the inside. It was all stained and nasty. And, I was angry enough that the first scripture that popped into my mind were the 7 woes. Woes to the Pharisees.
Right.
And, I'm arguing with God in the kitchen and in my head, so I didn't want people hearing me because it was ugly. I mean, the Holy Spirit was starting to leave the room, but he was just, onto me. And, the 7 woes, that said, look at it, the outside is horrible, the inside is full of dead men's bones. That's what's wrong with you. And I'm arguing with God while I'm scrubbing it out. And I go and I place it back in his desk, and I'm so excited that I finally have a word from God for this man. He's full of dead men's bones. He's a Pharisee. The woes to him. And all I felt in my spirit was, no, that's you. You're along with
Oh.
millions of other people, and you're carrying with you the bones of dead men and dead women who defined you in the past. Are you going to let me heal you? And
Oh
that's
my
what
gosh.
that
Okay, so we have to repeat that.
what I felt in my spirit is that was me, the dead men's bones, where I was shiny on the outside, and I had manicured nails, perfect hair. It wasn't this white frizzy stuff. Um, I dressed to the nines, and yet my cup was full of the bones of dead men. People who told me I couldn't join the church, people who called me names, people were upset about how I was born. Um, and what I felt in my spirit when I put that cup down was, "Are you gonna let me heal you?"
Oh, Deana.
And that was the beginning of my journey. That's when I met some of the comics that I know
Thank
now. I had a gal grab a hold of me with everything she had. I'd accidentally signed up for her newsletter, and I got called going, "Hey, I'm gonna be in town. Will you help promote?" "No, I quit ministry." She's like, just help me with this one." And so that's actually how I got started, was over getting my feelings hurt and God asking, "Are you gonna let me heal you?"
Wow.
And I think there's a lot of yeah, eh, so God in that regard is just very amazing, but it does take, well, as Brené Brown says, learning to be self-aware, learning to listen. But in my story, once I got in the church, it's been just a process,
Yeah.
and it shocked me that he asked permission.
Mm. I love that. Okay, I just love that that turning point.
Yeah.
Because we carry the bones of people who've hurt us, and the and we can let God heal us. We can let God heal us. And I want to say, um, when dealing with any difficult relationship, narcissistic, bipolar, um, what do they call borderline now? Hypersensitive,
Oh,
something or other.
mhm,
It doesn't matter what you're dealing with. You're dealing with a human that God loves,
mhm.
that Jesus gave his life for. Um, but and so we see them with compassion, right? We want to see people through Jesus eyes, and we have to ask for help with that because that is not natural. My
Right.
first response was, well, you didn't pee in the cup, right? So I'm just like, we have to fight our flesh and go, Lord, help me see this person through your eyes. But the other thing we have to see is that God is present. We don't have to
Mhm.
be God for them. We cannot fix people. And that's been a really, really hard probably lifelong lesson for me. I'm sure I'll have to keep learning it over and over again, but we aren't God. God is already working by giving someone a Judy Blume book because their mom doesn't believe in God, so would never give her a Christian book, right? God is already paving the way and reaching out to this person in by whatever means are available. And what we have to do is turn our hearts up so that God can pour into them, so that He can heal them, our hearts. Because this heart right here is the only one that I can choose to change. This
Exactly.
mind right here is the only one that I can say, you know what? God has given me the mind of Christ, and I'm going to trade this broken thing in for the mind of Christ, and I'm going to rewire my responses with so much practice. Um, those things that take work and feel so hard sometimes that we choose to stop healing. But we can choose to keep healing. We can choose to keep letting God touch us. And then in those moments, we're a different person washing this
Mhm.
cup, even though we're mad and we're building a sermon in our head, we're scrubbing out the cup, and then we're listening to God who says, hey, I have healing for you. Take it.
Yeah.
And that's a wonderful thank you. Thank you for telling us about that. And I love where this conversation is going. I want to bring you back again and again. Yay. So Deana O'Hara is who you've been listening to today, and she can be reached. I'm going to post a couple of links in the comments, but Deana can be reached at, let's see, Facebook, Deana O'Hara Comedy, Instagram, Deana O'Hara, and it's DeanaOhara. So it looks like Deanna, which is what I accidentally called her several times before she corrected me. But DeanaOhara. And she also has a website that's currently under reconstruction, but I'll post a link in there as well. Deana, God bless you abundantly for all that you've done, and I just so enjoy you. You have a
Too.
wonderful day. Do you have anything else you'd like to share before we go?
I think I've talked your ear off quite a bit, so
Nope, they're still attached.
this has been wonderful. Thank you, and yeah, just for having me and asking to share
Absolutely.
my story. It's most people know, tell me the jokes, and they want, I'm learning how to not sit and entertain and just sit and be me. So thank you for being willing to go deep and for your questions and all that.
Thank you for being willing to be so transparent. It is hard. I want just everybody to recognize it is hard to know what to share because you don't want to disrespect people, you don't want to hurt people. But if we don't share honestly, then nobody gets healed, right? There's somebody out there who goes, "Oh my gosh, that's how I feel," and they don't get that chance if we just do the entertainment part. So I appreciate you being so open. It's been wonderful. God
Wonderful.
bless you. I'll see everybody next time. Bye.